shirt sleeves, with a Colt 45 in his hand, and he said to us in a whisper, "There are hundreds of them here, lorry loads of them." I could hear the sound of the engine, and we assumed it was one of those lorry loads.
Would it go through the mic, Neve?
Eugene picked up his loose gun, and I picked up my rifle, and the next thing that I can remember is standing beside Nugent, who would fire a burst and then shout, "Surrender." I also fired some shots at what I thought were the lorry loads of Free State soldiers. I imagined that Nugent knew all along that all we were dealing with was an open-top touring car with 5 Free State soldiers in it. He was lying by the side of the road, badly wounded. He was face down, and to get his clothes off to tend his wounds, we had to open his Sam Brown belt. There was no way to do this, as the buckle was in front, and Nugent got out his knife and said to Thornton, who was conscious, "Do you mind if we cut your Sam Brown belt?" "I don't care, goddamn," said Thornton. Looking back, I cannot imagine how he managed to cut his way through the heavy leather belt with a penknife, but we did. We pulled off his trousers, and we opened his shirt. It was a miracle that one of them had not hit his backbone. We put some iodine on the wounds, but there's really nothing else which we could have done for him, other than sending a message to Clonmel to have them send out an ambulance as soon as they possibly could. While we were waiting for the ambulance, a priest came along in a pony and trap. He saw the dead bodies and, I suppose, Garton still in the road, and he came over to us. He thought we were the Free Staters, as many of them at that time did not yet have uniforms, and he said to us, "Oh, we poor lads, what happened to ye?" I said to him, "We are all right, Father. We're the ambushers." When he realised this, he let us have a barrage of abuse, and he said we were a filthy crowd of murderers, and that we were all roast in hell for it. As soon as he stopped for breath, I said, "There's a wounded man lying on that road, and we have sent for an ambulance for him. If you want to help, get into your pony and trap, go as fast as you can into Clonmel, and tell them to hurry out." Thornton recovered, but I doubt if he was ever able to do any more fighting in the Civil War. Many years later, I saw some correspondence between Dev and Joe McGarrity of the US. One of these letters was a letter written by Dev about this time somewhere in the south, and Dev referred to this ambush and said that he heard that a man who was one of the most determined of Collins's personal squad had been sent to Tipperary with the instructions to concentrate on getting Dev, alive or dead. Dev commented that he did not think this man would trouble us anymore. Sometime in the middle of the 50s, I would guess, I was introduced to Thornton outside the Gaiety Theatre in Dublin. I did not say to him that the last time I'd seen him, he was lying face down on a road outside Clonmel with several bullets in his back. The Civil War was surely the most futile tragedy.
And that's Redmondstown according to Egon O'Rahilla. So this is obviously the first kind of thing we've done with maps like this. So we're hoping to build on it and tell more stories like this. So you can hear the different versions of it along with the same action, or you can play it without the narrative if you want the quick version. So that's on our Corn and Oldback website. So if you go in there and you can just select the Redmondstown ambush, hoping to get Woodruff up there as well. And that's what I'm talking about tonight. I'll kick this off again. So we're really basing all these events happened around August to September, mid-August to early September 1922. So we're right on the centenary of these. So I'll just give you a little, I suppose, synopsis of where we're at in South Tipperary around this time. Now, I had started off giving a big long explanation of all the movements of the troops and everything. Essentially, though, Free State troops had come in from the north, they come up from the southeast, and the IRA, not being used to open line fighting, were being very under-equipped in comparison to the Free State troops, fell back before them. And by the 9th of August, Free State forces had rolled in to Clonmel. There had been delaying tactics on their way, but essentially this man, who's, I'm sure some people from Ballylouby might recognise him, it's Tommy Ryan. He was on the 1920 Bloody Sunday football team. And he had joined the Free State Army. He'd been a very good volunteer, but he had joined the Free State Army, and he was in charge of L Company, who walked in just after the IRA had evacuated Clonmel that day on the 9th of August. So he's part of General Prout's army. General Prout himself was another member of the 3rd Tipperary Brigade. He's probably most famous for being the training officer in the Ballinare training camp during the truce, but he had been in the States. He was from Dundrum, but he'd been in the States, and he was a general, he was a major, I think, in the US Army. So he became General Prout in the Free State Army, took a commission there. So the IRA were out in the countryside. The Clonmel garrison of the IRA, when they evacuated, basically regrouped down in Newcastle. And from that garrison really came the core of Jack Killian's flying column. So most of the Clonmel garrison had actually seen a lot of action. The IRA garrison had seen an awful lot of action up until this point. They had been formed part of a column with Micheál Sheehan, and they had marched up to Blessington, where they met Harry Boland. Then they came back down south. They were actually going to relieve the garrison in the forecourts after the attack. But by the time they got to Blessington, they turned around because the fighting was more or less over in Dublin. They turned around, they came back down through Wexford, they had fighting in Enniscorthy, over to Borris and Carlow, and they had fighting there as well. So by the time they're back down in Clonmel, they've fought in the delaying actions against the Free State forces, and they're now down in Newcastle. So Jack Killian's column was officially formed on the 14th of August. Down in Newcastle, and it was largely made up of 5th Battalion volunteers, with a few ring-ins like Harry McCulday, Gonarala as well. But he wasn't there from the beginning, he joined later. But as Sean said, 20 to 25 men at all times, and within those 20 to 25 men there were 2 machine gun squads. One was run by Jack Aylward, also from Clonmel, and the other by Jim Nugent. So that's where we are. This is a photo taken in Great Namana when the column were on the way from the date, I would say, probably back on the backward journey back to Tipperary from Blessington. This is Jack Killian here. This is Micheál Sheehan. I just got told tonight that this is Edward Dalton, that Sean mentioned his uncle. And this is Jim Nugent here. And if anybody has any other names, we'd love to hear them tonight.
Standing up at the back, the men holding the rifle there.
Here?
Andy Maloney.
Andy Maloney,
Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, we'll see. That's fantastic. I know there's a couple of caricature men on there as well, but I haven't got their names, but I've been told they're on the back as well. So anybody else got any other names? Yeah, Pat?
Yeah, there was a man from Belfast, the recent Lynch commemoration, and he showed us this photograph, and his grandfather was on, he asked me to guess his grandfather's name, so I gave up on that. It was kind of futile, so his grandfather's name was Edward Carson.
Yeah, I've heard of, he came down from Belfast, I think, didn't he? It's not the normal name of a volunteer. Yeah, you'd think he'd have a totally different background. But anyway, this is, a lot of these men are probably in Jack Killian's column on the 14th of August. So Sean said Jack was an ex-British Army officer, or British Army, so he was well used to the fight. and I think I did point him out, but that's Micheál Sheehan. He actually has an injured arm, he's got it in his pocket, he'd been injured in the fighting, so he's holding the arm kind of gingerly. Just before the first Woodruff ambush I'm going to talk about, the day before the column was officially formed on the 13th of August, firing some members of the 5th Battalion as was, and some of the relatives are here tonight. They might have gone up onto the hills just south of Clonmel, and they fired down at the Free State soldiers who were on parade. They were on their way to Mass, and caused great consternation. But a young prisoner in the Clonmel Town Hall, according to the Free State soldiers, they said that he came to the window and he was shouting, and they told him to step back from the window during the shooting, and he wouldn't. And they fired a warning shot, and he ended up dead. So that was Michael Condon. Now, he would have been more than likely on that charabanc in that photo somewhere. We don't have a photo of him, we can't identify him. Unless somebody has here, we'd be most grateful. But the 5th Battalion men knew him, and down in the following day after he died, they formed the column down in Newcastle. So his inquest fell through. So they had an inquest for him, but the Free State couldn't actually produce any witnesses, any material witnesses, which would have been his fellow prisoners who witnessed the shooting. They had all been transferred to Kilkenny Jail and were unavailable for the inquest. And the coroner just said, well, we can't have it. So he never had an inquest, and therefore he's never had a death cert or anything. If you go and look him up, he doesn't exist in the records. So the entire column turned out for his funeral down in Newcastle. He was from Waterford, but I won't even try and say the name of the townland. It's got way too many GHs in it. Anyway, he was buried down around Newcastle area, and the whole column were there. And the 16th of August, the first Woodruff ambush happens. And I know you all know Woodruff probably better than I do, but it's on the road over towards Clonmel, or to Care from Clonmel. And here is a map that is available up on the source. It's been digitised. It was lent to the source by the owners, and I've got permission to use it tonight. And I'd like to thank Josephine O'Neill and Tom Hennessy for arranging that for me. But this is an old IRA map, and we're still trying to make out markings. But if you look at all these dotted lines of possibly paths, column paths or marching paths or something, they run right through Woodruff Domain. This is the main road coming from Clonmel over in the Care direction, and this is where the first ambush happened on the 16th, so just 3 days after Michael Condon lost his life in Clonmel. We know that quite a large contingent of troops, Free State troops, left Clonmel in the evening on the 16th of August, and they were going over to Care to reinforce the Care garrison over there. Now, why did they take the road when there's a perfectly good railway line? Everybody knows that at this point the IRA had basically wrecked most of the railway lines, so the railways were not usable, and hence a much more dangerous travel by road was necessary. So the column, Jacqueline's newly formed column, who were actually not really newly formed, they're very experienced, as we know, they were situated around this area. So you can see there's actually an arrow there on the map, but this is where the column were, right here, lined along this avenue. And this is up on a height. It's a very flat area, but there is a bit of a rise on the ground. So this is several feet, several metres, probably 30 metres above the road, and they had a fantastic view. And the lorries came along, but they had blocked the road, so the soldiers were forced to dismount, and they went through the domain on foot. But they were very experienced people. So the captain in charge of this contingent of troops was Captain Thomas Mullally, Mullaney, and he got them to march through the domain in extended formation, which meant there's at least this amount of clearance between each man, which mitigated against an ambush. They were a little bit spread out, and they were going through the forested area in the domain. But Killeen's men showed amazing discipline, because they held fire even when the troops came out of the domain onto the main entrance from Woodruff, which is about there. You can see the path of it there. And they had to get back into the lorries, so the lorries had come round. And as they were mounting into the lorry, that's when the machine gun sections opened fire. And in that first barrage of shots, 3 Free State soldiers were killed and about 9 wounded. Now, Killeen's men called for a surrender, but the Free State forces refused to surrender, and they returned fire. They took cover and they returned fire, and the fire lasted about an hour. But of course, Killeen then was forced to withdraw his troops, so they retreated back towards probably Nicholstown or somewhere down there. So it was, however, the very first large-scale offensive by the Flying Column since the Free State troops had entered and taken over South Tipperary. So it was a sign that the war in Tipperary wasn't over, and it got a lot of coverage in the local press. So we've got the casualty list here. So there was a Cornelius Roach, who was a volunteer, an old volunteer from Cahir, and he was killed. And Joe Bergen, it wasn't Joseph, he was actually Joachim Bergen, and he was from Castlecomer, another IRA man. And then lastly, Daniel Fogarty from Lochmore, and I think Daniel was an ex-British Army, but the other 2 had been volunteers. And then there were a number of wounded, so they're listed here as well. At the same time, there was clearly a crackdown from the Free State side. So a lot of you will know the name Tom Carew. He had been the intelligence officer in the 3rd Tipperary Brigade. He was now called the commandant of the 3rd Tipperary Brigade Free State side, and he issued a proclamation saying anybody caught helping any IRA basically, or holding arms, or anything that doesn't belong to them will face court-martial. So things were already beginning to crack down in response to that. So I'm going to skip now just a short while later. So we're jumping to September, where again at Woodruff we have another ambush. The reason Woodruff was such a hot spot, because there were at least 3 ambushes in Woodruff in the early part of the Civil War, and we're only going to deal with the 2 of them tonight. But of course it was on that Clonmel Care road, and there was a lot of troop movement. And Woodruff that area was probably the only area where you had a rise in the land on the south side, which would leave you, which was an ideal ambush position. So it was a favourite of Jacqueline's column, and they were back again on the 9th of September. So they'd already seen action at Redmondstown. They'd had a few other skirmishes with Free State troops, and they're back on the 9th of September. But this time, when they took their positions up, which was pretty much the same positions that they took up with the first ambush, because why would you mess with something that worked? They were spotted. So a group of Free State officers came out in the morning, and they got as far as Barn, and they said, oh, hang on, what's going on here? And they saw movement, and they went back to Clonmel, and they said, there's something going on. So out they come from Clonmel. They had, I think it was, I should have my notes here, because I'm very bad with numbers, but it was quite a, look at all the things I was supposed to have said. Anyway, let me see. 4 lorry loads, a tender, and 2 armoured cars left Clonmel. So that's a lot of troops. From Cahir, we don't have the numbers of what we do know there was a machine gun section and more troops left from Cahir, and their aim was to get to Woodruff and create an encirclement and basically capture the entire column. So there were a couple of errors here by the troops, by the column, whether they weren't ready by the time the troops arrived, or they were lax in their security, but they, as you can see here, there's a number of byroads to get to the back of where they are. They should have been blocked and they weren't. So that had implications. So anyway, we'll have a look and see how it goes. So this is my pre-Google Maps version of the ambush. So here we have the IRA. Now, we know their positions thanks to Colin Malaria's, Father Colin Hill's notes that he took that are in Damring's witness statement. We know the main contingent was sitting here, just where they were before. Jack Aylward's machine gun squad are over on the right flank, and left flank is Jim Nugent's machine gun squad. They were a little bit further down the hill. And so hopefully this will work now. So they're basically in the same positions they were at the previous ambush. And here are the troops coming out from Clonmel and from Cahir approaching. And the idea was that they basically wait until they got to this point again, and the troops would be stuck between the three sections under fire, and but they'd hopefully force them to surrender this time. But instead, our old friend Tommy Ryan was in charge this time, and he wasn't taking any chances. So he got the troops to dismount earlier, and he sent a section of them over here through the fields to head up the avenue here and to attack this section here. And an armoured car came up here, so there was fire opened here on the troops here, and they were forced back up the hill. But of course, if you're any good, you're going to go further back again. So more troops coming in along here, and the troops from Cahir are arriving along here as well. So the IRA have nowhere to go, and they're stuck at poor James Heffernan's farm called Cuckoo Hill, right there. They're at the back of the farm, in the haggard at the back, and Free State soldiers are coming down the avenue at the front, and it looks like it's curtains for most of Jacqueline's flank column. Not all of them went that way, so I'll go into how they separated later, but some of them went from there. They had a skirmish along this area, and they headed down this way, and then some of them went to Nicholstown, a little bit further over. But the skirmish